are talking GODFORSAKEN. This one written and directed by Ali Akbar Akbar Kamal and is a Canadian found footage movie. It hit the festival circuit in 2020, now being released kind of more generally in 2022. So this is a kind of a biblical horror movie in a lot of ways, and it focuses on a team of 3 documentary filmmakers, one of which who lives at this kind of very rural American town, and within this town there seems to be a strange event that has occurred. There was a funeral for a young woman, and during the actual kind of funeral service she seems to awaken from death, and not only that, she appears to be able to perform kind of certain miracles, and this kind of obviously has an effect, you might say in some ways positive, some ways negative, on the kind of local townsfolk. And this is all captured by our 3 documentarians. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss GODFORSAKEN. So I actually have to say, I thought the hook of this movie was pretty strong. Right from the beginning, it starts off with this kind of funeral kind of service with the kind of the people in the church, and we have the kind of the open casket at the front with this kind of young woman in it, and we see her ultimately awake from this coffin, and everyone's understandably kind of freaking out and not really knowing what it means. And she seems a little bit different, shall we say. And I have to say, what a hook. I thought that was an intriguing start to the sort of story. And then from there, she's displaying both powers of positivity. She seems to be able to heal the sick, but at the same time she seems somewhat kind of feral and is kind of eating live animals and stuff, and everyone who kind of seems to be in close contact with it ends up being a little bit on the weird side, shall we say. So it's an intriguing kind of plot line for a movie, and our 3 kind of antagonists aren't really sure about what to do. So I have to say, the actual idea of certainly the first half of this movie, maybe even the first 2/3 of this movie, I've got to say was interesting, intriguing, and had me pretty hooked, I have to say. It's surprisingly effects heavy for a found footage movie. Now, I don't mean that there's loads of monsters or stuff on screen, but a lot of found footage movies, you do find that it kind of tends to sort of veer away from special effects shots and things like this. But certainly in the kind of the second half of this movie, you'll find that you do see a reasonable amount of stuff on camera that I have to say was done in good effect. I'd also say this movie does a good job of really having a dark and foreboding atmosphere. Now, to me, the whole kind of idea of the found footage genre is it creates a feeling of immersion, because you believe you're kind of, obviously we know it's obviously a movie, but it kind of has that suspension of disbelief where you're kind of seeing, or you believe at this hour and a half, you'll kind of leave your kind of imagination to kind of just run rampant and believe what's kind of going on in front of you as if it was kind of real. And that's kind of the I think the strength of found footage movie as a general rule. There's certain limitations that comes with that, but I think the movie does a good job of kind of bringing you in and kind of really making you feel this kind of sense of dread and kind of paranoia that, although things might seem kind of like positive on the surface, there's clearly kind of more kind of going on, and as the kind of the film progresses, I feel it does a good enough job here of giving you some answers, but not all, which still I think makes you kind of satisfied overall, and at the same time leaving you still with questions, but not you don't feel kind of a sense of blue balls after this one, I have to say. So that was all pretty good. It's again the other thing I would say as well with this movie, and it seems reasonable in scale. We get a lot of people involved. There's kind of a lot of extras. We see all this kind of different people within this kind of town seemingly kind of affected it. So it seems, although it's not a flashy with kind of set pages and stuff, there's a few different locations. There seems to be quite a lot of you know, extras involved and things like this to give it like somewhat like a mass appeal. But what doesn't work with this movie, the third act for me it falls a little flat, and that is because even though there is certainly more graphic stuff on screen, and as I say, there is a reasonable use of kind of special effects, it turns into somewhat of a more generic zombie film, unfortunately. And I think the kind of the sense of foreboding and kind of you know, religious kind of overtones and kind of and that sort of thing, that kind of the more of the subtle approach that I think the first two acts had, were left in favour of having a more of a kinetic kind of action orientated third act. But it just kind of seemed like just a zombie film at the end of the day, at the end of the third act, and thus becomes a little generic in the kind of the third act. There are some kind of questions of, again, and I mentioned in the positives about having the you know, the air of believability and being able to kind of, you know, watch this and accept that, oh yeah, this is kind of this feels like it's kind of real. You can kind of have that sense of believability with it. But there are things that I think work against that. For example, I think that the whole conceit of found footage is, why are these people filming? And there's a lot here that I think, why would these people still be filming? And even to go further in that, I'm thinking, even if these people were to still have rolling cameras, they wouldn't be kind of, you know, think about the context of what happens to them. They're getting what's in frame, you know, so there are monsters, but this, you know, we've still got to get it in frame and kind of things like this. Do you see what I mean? So this is the problem with found footage. You can do it on the cheap, you can kind of get away with, you know, but sort of worse acting, things like this, but there are certain limitations involved in the kind of the believability of it. And I think in this one, there's not really a good enough reason why these people are filming in certain situations. Even and go further than that, you're thinking, these, you know, it just looks like someone's properly filming, if that makes sense. So that there's that. Some of the acting as well is a little bit of a mixed bag. There are some kind of performances where I feel people are trying just a little bit too hard. And I have to say, our sort of trio of characters, you know, who seem like the sort of typical people who you see in these kind of documentary film crews that go and investigate something. You know, they're all kind of like piss-arsing around at the beginning. And it's always this, I understand you want to have this character building moments within the first kind of act of the movie. But a lot of the time you see these like apparent documentary filmmakers in found footage movies always just dicking around. And I'm thinking, you know, if these people were going out to do a particular kind of job, I actually think it works better when people are seen to work more professionally rather than arsing about all the time, which seems to be the kind of the standard kind of template for a kind of a found footage movie. So it does kind of fall into some sort of typical kind of found footage kind of cliches and kind of traps and things like this. And as I said, so the film goes on, it becomes, I think it loses its kind of its identity a little bit. It feels very much like a you know, a religious horror film with a great hook initially, but then it descends into more of a generic kind of horror film. But nonetheless, I do think this movie is a good example of, you know, a good hook. And I think even though I think it ends up being generic in the last act, it doesn't mean it's a bad last act, I would say. It just feels a little bit of a letdown compared to, I think, the stronger first two acts. But it's still watchable in that last act, and as such, I gotta say, I think overall, that to me makes this movie a slightly above average kind of found footage movie with an interesting hook. And certainly, I would have liked to have maybe seen more of it and kind of maybe things explored more than kind of the third act that we did get. But nonetheless, it's still a worthy watch. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.